Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's good to know that I'm sharing the stage with someone who at your age has a passion for the things that I'm about to talk about tonight. Because it's really people like Bolton and the rest of you in the room that really can make a difference in the environments we have. Because they are great disconnects in placemaking. Let me pull this over here so I can I can have this, that's right. So one of the things that really I'm going to talk about tonight was a book actually that I discovered reading a blog that was President Clinton was part of, had commented upon this book, and I said, I got to get this book and read it. And I don't know how many of you have read it, but I fully recommend it to you, called The Big Sort. And it talks about these great disconnects between mindsets in our environments these days. Now, that people, of course, will move to other places. This is a great map of the United States that shows basically those areas that are liberal-leaning and those that are more conservative. The blues, the reds, and the pinks, and the light blues in between. Now, it's interesting about this. People will move to urban areas based upon their values and their mindsets, and other people will seek more rural areas or enclaves outside urban zones that speak to their conservatism. Now, it's interesting as a brand developer, I'll tell you, this change in mindset is something that in the consumer products world that we exploit, because we seek to understand people's behaviors, their motivations, their fears, their desires, in order to position products and experiences toward them. This is very much reality. I love this quote. You think about this, and we wonder why we have a disconnect in the houses of Congress right now, like this comment from Nate Silver, who I think most people will consider a great pundit, that there's only 35 congressional seats that are now competitive across the United States. It's an amazing thing when you think about it. And people go to these areas and they seek, again, to surround themselves with people and ideas that they gravitate to, that are like them. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to show a little movie here that clearly you'll see is oriented toward those blue areas. This is a district in Charlotte.
It's a special neighborhood because I feel like it's one of the most unique neighborhoods in Charlotte.
We got the beautiful skyline in the background every single day. You can hop on the light rail line and head uptown for client meetings or events, and it's a walkable area.
We've got a lot of funky retail. We've got really interesting nightlife and little clubs and bars. We have a great variety of small businesses and large businesses that operate through here. So it ends up being a really nice mix of people.
I chose South End because of its close proximity to the uptown area. A lot of my clients work in the uptown area, and I believe it's a central location. But most of all, because of its sophistication and chicness, it just kind of gives me like a New York, Chicago type feel. And this is one of the very few areas in Charlotte that offers that.
I started this business about 28 years ago. This was an ideal place. It was affordable, and it just fit what I was looking for.
I think South End is special because it is a neighborhood that's being built by the people who have chosen to move there. It was a grassroots effort from the beginning, and so now we see a lot more people catching on to a great thing.
This should look familiar to you. I mean, in many ways, right, the district we're in is a place that's created. It attracts millennials. It attracts baby boomers who are looking to move out of their single-family homes and come to a place where they can find a lifestyle that's more open and supportive of a convivial life. This is South End. I was part of this effort. It's 20 years old. We created it out of nothing, a warehouse district, very much like you have here. We brought a vintage trolley line to this thing, did a huge charrette, civil disobedience campaign led by, in many ways, Hugh McCall, then chairman of the Bank of America. And lo and behold, end of the day, we managed to get a light rail line here. This is a kind of revitalization and placemaking one normally expects to see within our cities, because I do believe our cities are back. Even places like Detroit, a place where I'm working in downtown. Downtown Detroit is on a great upswing. The rest of it has problems. You read about those problems, but downtown Detroit is on a real trajectory, and money's behind it, as are the wills of people. So we tend to think that, well, this is the model for creating places. That in the suburbs, it is about the single-family home, it's about the strip shopping center, it's about the garden multifamily apartments, and it's about the insular life. Well, let me show you another movie about a place that runs totally counter to that belief. Oh, this is one more slide there. That was the one in, again, the light rail in South End.
Hello, I'm Terry Shook of Shook Kelley. I'm standing in the midst of Birkdale Village, a mixed-use project we designed over 10 years ago.
As you can see, it is a glorious Saturday, and people are all about shopping, dining, and simply enjoying the street life, or taking in the day from their second-floor apartment deck. When Birkdale Village opened 10 years ago, the CBS Morning News guy said,
Lisa Birnbach found the perfect place for those who don't want to get in a car to go out.
and the developer said,
we're leasing our residential units about as fast as we can build them.
and the resident said,
I wanted to live on Main Street. And that's basically what this reminds you of, is a little small town.
and the worker said.
It is nice to walk to work.
Since then, Birkdale has been a roaring success. But as these people enjoy their day, little do they know that there is a crisis looming in America. In the wake of the Great Recession, bankers, capital partners, and yes, even developers that may want to build such places have decided that they, well, are not worth the risk. And we are here today to break the news to all of these people who love this place. No more Birkdale Villages.
Well, what would you say if I told you that some of the bankers of the world and the investors don't believe in things like Birkdale Village and not supporting any more of them?
I'd call you a liar because I wouldn't believe you. If anyone doesn't want to support something like Birkdale, it's foolish. It's probably the best thing about this town.
Maybe I'll invest in it, so you guys don't make the money and I will, because this is, I think, the way of the future. It seems to be a good, decent development, and I see a lot of these making money going forward.
I know that you could take my house and move it a couple miles down the road another way, and it would probably be worth $100-some thousand less than it is just because it's located right next to this.
It's a nice place for people to come, relax, and I think it'll bring a lot to whatever community that surrounds it as well.
I have an office right here. My brother and I started a company. All of our employees live within the community. We have a lot of people that come in from out of town, and they love this. They love the scene here. They love the center of life that Birkdale is for the community.
I don't think you get a sense of community with strip malls, and I was looking for community.
What is Birkdale Village? It is over 300,000 square feet of retail, 54,000 square feet of office space, and 320 apartments built on 52 acres. If this amount of development had been built in a suburban manner, over 110 acres of land would have been consumed. Birkdale has public streets and mid-block parking, with small private parking decks for those who live here. Birkdale was intended to feature only 6 restaurants. Now it boasts 14, and the parking still works. Most importantly, the apartments practically lease themselves, and the retail is leased in the high 90% range at rents that rival the nearest mall. And the reason, in large part, is that Birkdale Village is not a standalone development. It is directly connected to a traditional neighborhood development and adjacent to a conventional golf course community. People do actually walk to Birkdale, leaving the car at home. Yes, many people love Birkdale Village and support it with their time and their wallets. Sure, a lot of so-called lifestyle centers were built in the last decade that failed miserably. Wrong place, wrong concept, and no market was often the problem. However, when properly conceived, leased, designed, and managed, people will flock to them and your bottom line will be rewarded. After all, it's not about a lifestyle, it's about life. So this is Birkdale Village. Let me tell you a little bit about this place. This place is so suburban that it doesn't even have service from a full-time city fire department. Okay? It is part of suburban Charlotte. It is primarily in an area inhabited by those who vote overwhelmingly conservative, Republican voters. It is surrounded by strip shopping centers that it overperforms. I don't know if I can work this. Oh, there you go. See all these? These were here before Birkdale Village. Interstate, highway system all around it. It is an area, again, I talked about it. 2 volunteer fire departments share the duty. At 4th of July, they come together at the big 4th of July celebration and have an anti-tug of war. They use the water to push the red ball back and forth. See, someone's dog got loose. But it's about fostering civic life at the highest level. So you have 2 different kinds of places here I've shown in these quick little video clips. South End, at the edge of downtown Charlotte, uptown as we like to say it in our pretentious Charlotte ways, and Birkdale Village, which is way on the edges. So what's really going on here? What is the connection between those 2? Well, before I answer that question, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things here. First off, which one of these shoes is more desirable? A little quiz here. Is it that one or that one? Which is a more desirable shoe, right? We know the answer to that. It's the Nike shoe, right? It'd be the same shoe. Which can of peas would you buy if you're shopping for your family? You're in the store. Dad, mom, doesn't matter. Which one of those cans of peas are you likely to buy and bring home? Okay, let's see. You're going out to eat. Which one of those people do you trust with your food? Now, I can make a case for the guy on the left if it's a good barbecue joint. Now, let's be honest. He gets a pass. He gets a pass. I'm sure he does here, and he certainly does in North Carolina, the land of real barbecue. We'll get a fight going there, I'm sure. But that's the but that's the case. What this is all about is our perceptions, right? It's understanding the values inside our head. As Leonardo da Vinci put it so well, all of our knowledge has its origins in our perceptions, right? Everything we know. And our world is basically a psychographic one. Now, many in the room probably make their living or have knowledge of the world of demographics. We try to sort people into these things. That's what the big sort in many ways was about at its most basic level. That's how you understand the dynamic. But what's really happening there is the fact that people from a psychographic standpoint adopt all manner of different views about the world and become a part of our personality and who we are. And sometimes they're actually contradictory, those perceptions we have about the world. But in any case, it doesn't reside on a spreadsheet. It doesn't reside in a study. But that world resides right there between our ears. And understanding that world, that psychographic world, and responding to that both through products, experiences, and places is what the 21st century is all about. Now, case in point, one of my clients is Harley Davidson. Now, people mention Harley Davidson motorcycles, you start to think of this automatically, right? You start to think of the motorcycle gangs and what have you. It has that aura about it. But the truth is, Harley Davidson's really about family for people who may not have a real family. There's a deep psychographic underpinning to Harley Davidson. We did a study for them, a very long one that I can't share much about, but the family idea behind Harley Davidson is deep and wide and appeals to many people. For example, one of their biggest growth segments happens to be females. I'm talking about school teachers. I'm talking about secretaries. I'm talking about successful female lawyers. I'm talking about a whole range of people. So you can't start to peg the Harley Davidson rider by a demographic. It's a psychographic. What do you value? What does it mean to you? And that's true with many products in the consumer products world. I could tell stories for days about this, about the products that all of us buy and all of us gravitate to. So what does this have to do with South End and Birkdale Village? Well, what it means, both express a yearning for an urban experience. Not only what you would normally assume is urbanity with South End, but also with Birkdale Village. Now, most of the times people hear the word urban, they have an immediate visceral reaction to it, right? We think about a family who really does live in Chicago or in New York, right? Or Los Angeles, what have you, and we associate images with them in a typical way. We think about urban filth, we think about urban crime, we think about urban hassles. Normally those things attend the idea of urbanism. But in fact, from a psychographic standpoint, The urban person we're talking about is a seeker of connection with people and places. They value diversity. They don't see it as a threat. They're looking for conviviality. They're looking for places where they can connect with other people. Not just people who see the world as they do, but with other people who might have different values and opinions. They're looking for a healthy lifestyle, looking for a place where walking matters. They do want to walk. And gradually, environmental consciousness, environmental responsibility is part of their makeup. They recognize that living in places such as South End, or for that matter, Birkdale Village, is a responsible thing to do to leave their kids and grandkids. But that's an operating system deep in the back, and it'll only start to come in the fore, I predict, in the years and decades ahead. But it's there. It's very much there. And what we say is that when you consider this, that everyone, I don't care if you live in a gated enclave outside Dallas, Texas, or Houston, or whether or not you live in Chicago itself, there's this value for urban connections. We call it the Grittiness Index. It just depends on how visceral and how well, gritty, that's the word, right, that you value urbanism. And it varies across the spectrum. When you look at South End, you know, that's very much a decidedly urban place. It has a lot at the edges of those attributes on the negative side that people identify with the largest cities. The reality, though, is always less than the myth. Always is. But still, it's there. When you look at a Birkdale Village in the heart of suburban edges of Charlotte, it clearly doesn't have those perceptions, nor does it really have many of those attributes either. So it's about, again, going back, it's about people who are risk adverse at one end of the spectrum versus people who are risk oblivious. But it still is that same paradigm, that same continuum. It's just finding your slot where you are, that you want to respond, how you want to respond. Well, how do we get there? I mean, that's always the difficult question, and people ask me this all the time. I get so many people coming to Birkdale Village, it's now 11 years old, developers, citizen groups, planners. You can't imagine how many tours we've given to that place over the years, people trying to understand the alchemy of it. And so let me talk about a few of the things that we find disconnections in our time that prevent Birkdale Villages from happening, and perhaps in that you'll see also pathways in your own area as you begin this great planning exercise with a friend of mine, I might add. I know Scott Polikoff, a good friend. You've got a good guy there. He'll treat you well. First off, the first perception you have to understand with all of this, guys in the room, stay seated. It's a woman's world. It really is increasingly so. It's always been that way. We've never really admitted it. Now we admit it. I remember sitting in an ICSC meeting, the International Council of Shopping Centers, a few years ago for a leading edge conference. And they wanted to have a session called Chasing the Cool, that which is cool. I just looked around the room and started laughing. They said, "What are you laughing about, Shook?" I said, "I'm sitting here at a table with a bunch of 60-year-old white guys just like me." I said, "There's not a woman in here and no one of color. We don't know a thing about cool." And they said, "Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe." I said, "Yeah, exactly, you're right. That's the point." And it's clearly, think about it. You know this. Wives and daughters of the room, you know, make sure you get this across to the men in your life. You know, interesting thing about retail. See, all the great thing about the convivial space, both of these places we're talking about, it all depends upon retail. That's what animates the public realm. Well, look at the differences the way we perceive this stuff. I mean, women see shopping as an important part of their lives. And men, it's a pain. It's something we have to do, an extraordinary need, you know, or an extraordinary response to a pressing need. Our clothing is worn out. Oh, we need new pants. I mean, generally that's what happens. Think about in America, women make 73% of all trips to the supermarket, 80% of all consumer good purchasing decisions. The important part in terms of convivial spaces, 90% of all family outing decisions. And you know this from your school probably already, 2/3 of undergraduate degrees, 60% of masters now go to women, and they start businesses at twice the rate of men. This is a great quote from one of the major think tanks in the United States. The future belongs to those of us, male or female, who can adopt or embrace the feminine archetype. Placemaking, the idea of these convivial places really is the domain of that feminine archetype. We men were out during the days of hunter and gatherers, throwing the big rocks at the mastodons and bringing it back to these new thing called villages that women were left to tend and to take care of. But the irony of this is, of course, more people are living the single life than ever before. That's another factor that we believe fuels many of these convivial places and why they're so important for a civil society going forward. This is a great quote when I have a dog up there. I mean, all a dog really wants is to be fed and loved. A man just has too many other needs and emotions. So if you are a single woman and just tired of the games and stress that men bring, why not join the already millions of satisfied dog-owning women? Stop feeling depressed and bring some joy back into your life with someone that you know will love you back. This is from a website, from a project we did in Washington, D.C. on a transit line for multifamily. This was just a representative of many of the comments. And what you'll see in many of these mixed-use multifamily places, the explosion of dogs, single men and women, is just over the chart. It is that surrogate relationship, and they're as much as part of the urban environment as any other living creature. And what this really is a harbinger of the change in our social structure. When you think about only 20% of American families are nuclear, and in cities it can be less than 10%. 36 million single households in the U.S., 70 million of them single seniors. Women finding social and business support away from men. 50% of all marriages ending in divorce, sadly. 33% will spend more on themselves. And it's no longer a scarlet letter to be single and raising a child alone. A big change that in my lifetime. These are the realities of our time. And as someone who is now 60 this year, I know for a fact that when I do decide to retire sometime around 96 or 97, because we boomers don't believe we are actually getting old, that we will redefine what it means to be old. Whereas in the silent and greatest generations, we gravitated to CCRCs, these kind of like big cruise ships that were moored in the middle of a place and you went in the walls and you lived there. The boomers are not going to be satisfied with that. A big majority will not. Traveled the world, seen places, enjoyed urban environments, will not put up with institutional food inside some place that you overpay for to begin with. They're going to be wanting to live in different places. These are the places, when they get rid of that house, they're going to want to gravitate to. It's a sea change, really. Plus, if they wanted to live in the CCRC, there's not going to be a social support mechanism through pensions or through other funds, that, savings, that really pay for it. Services are going to be more a la carte than a fixed price anyway. So it's a big movement. If you think about it, some grew up in the Jack Kerouac generation, others during the 70s of Vietnam, and they're not going to put up with it. Even certain people like in Atlanta know this. This is something that they're even looking and planning for this, for something called a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. A lot of people in different places are looking for this. It has a CCRC industry, I might tell you, in fits right now as they try to look at their campuses they have, and they know this bubble's coming, and they have a business model that's out of line with future reality. The other thing to consider about this placemaking is that experience and emotion are the fuels of it. We live in a different time as well. Many people, I'm sure, slept through their freshman year sociology classes and were introduced to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In fact, it wasn't just a bad academic course at 8 o'clock in the morning. It is very real. People are really now living in the zone of spiritual need. And these places really provide that in many ways. Whether you're sitting there with a book on a bench or whether you're there with friends, they become surrogate in many ways for a lot of people as we have an increasingly unchurched generation. They're social and spiritual sanctuaries, the connection with people in these places. It's very much a reality. And society. Society is all about food. It really is. That's how it started, around the campfire, eating food. But with that in mind, who saw this coming? Who thought that food would be a reality television at the highest level? That people, and I don't think we still don't cook any more than we used to. I mean, you go in a lot of apartment communities, we laugh about it. The ovens, after sometimes 3 or 4 years, will still have the papers inside the oven. And that's where renters will keep their important documents under the theory that if they'll keep the heat in, that if the place catches on fire, it'll protect their birth certificate and their car titles. You know, it's like a kind of de facto fire safe. But still, it's very much part of it. People are conscious of what they put in their bodies. They're conscious about the social aspects of it, and even to the point that they're watching on television. Well, here's the real question. I just touched on some of the things that are trends in current life. But with such a market demand, why is the marketplace not responding like crazy? You think about this. If Nike was involved or Apple was involved of real estate, what would happen? Why is it not just everywhere? These Birkdale villages, right? And other places like it. I just picked that one. There's about 6 or 7 of them across the country that A, are successful, and B, fulfill that criteria for conviviality. Well, I'll tell you, it's inertia. It's pure inertia in public policy, primarily zoning. We'll talk about that in a minute. In the behavior of developers, and developers are primarily middlemen. You know, they go to McDonald's, do you want fries with that? I mean, that's what basically developers are. People like to pillory them, but in fact, they're caught between these 2 extremes. And that other extreme being banking guidelines that in our day and time have effectively killed the notion of risk. Not only the notion, but risk in fact. Let me go through a few of those things. You're here tonight because you obviously care about your environment. You know the differences between Euclidean zoning and form-based zoning. I'm sure most of you do, so I will not go into a long diatribe about that. But it really is so fundamental in terms of the argument, the fault line, and the disconnects. There are still people who defend this, as we in this room, most of us, I'm sure, you know, can't see why the people over here can't see why this is the only way to go. Why these people can't see that you can have a compact town center where people can live in an urban way, yet people who want to live in that can still live at the edges and everybody walk to that convivial town center. Of course, a few years ago, with when Sean Donovan, a great Secretary of Housing, came into the Obama administration, you were the beneficiary, quite frankly, one of the programs that came out of that. You know, again, people looked at it and said, you know, HUD says end the sprawl, and of course, this is something, a quote from the Charter of the Congress of New Urbanism, which talks about what is really behind New Urbanism. We stand for the restoration of existing urban centers and towns within coherent metropolitan regions, the reconfiguration of sprawling suburbs and communities of real neighborhoods and diverse districts, the conservation of natural resources, our natural environments, and the preservation of our built legacy. Well, the problem, of course, is that many in the CNU are like Orthodox priests, and they are really dogmatic and inflexible in how they try to manifest this, I think, unassailable statement. And because of that, it gets, and because of other factors, of course, there's books written about this too. You know, it's just like what's happening in Washington now. You can't have a middle ground. It's either one or the other. You're on my side or the other side. And sprawl is completely clear. The end of the suburbs, sprawl is dead. But in fact, that's not the case. And there are people out there, an equal number of people, who fight back very bitterly. You know, again, oppose stack 'em and pack 'em zoning. This reminds me of what happened in San Francisco. Well, actually, it happened after World War II. You know, the great song, you know, there's a red one, there's a green one, there's a blue one, there's a pink one. They're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they're all just the same. The great Seeger song. It was about that holy war that broke out after World War II, is whether or not we would have suburbs or whether we would build, you know, everybody would live in an apartment. And they're still hearkening back to that time, trying to pin that label, that great battle that took place right after the World War II on the new urbanist. And of course, these people there are big monies behind it. The American Dream Coalition is really the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the Heartland Institute, the Club for Growth, and all these others. You know, auto companies, oil companies, all the big interests that have a vested interest in sprawl are behind these kind of activities, pushing it back against the concepts of smart growth on ideology and not understanding, as we've gone through, this underlying yearning for people that they represent for these type of places. Truth is, they probably still go to these kinds of places and enjoy it and have a big time and don't see the disconnect themselves. Suburban sprawl never left. Yes, it's on its way back. And the interesting thing is that even developers who want to do something different than sprawl get caught up with the other developers when they go in a lot of times and try to seek rezonings in areas that do things like Birkdale Village get ran out of town, oftentimes simply because the A word is in there, the apartment. Because a lot of people in suburbs, even, well, instead of see Birkdale Village, I would love this, people living up there, my daughter could live there, the fireman could live there, whatever. But when you deal with it in the abstract like this, they say, oh no, apartments, can't have that, that just decreases my property value. Why? Well, because the Cato Institute told me so. I mean, it's those kinds, that miasma that's out there, that's a very difficult thing to deal with, even for the people who want to do the right thing. So, also, this inertia in developer behavior goes into the very definition of the most important part of it, which is retail. If you take the holistic view, the CNU, I mean, retail is just one of the things that helps animate public life. It's just one of the many things, right? Within buildings designed first and foremost to frame the public realm. Well, from a developer standpoint, because a typical developer, again, is an order taker from a very difficult group of clients called tenants who have their own rules and ideas of the world. And then he's also dealing with the bankers we'll talk about the other end. So he's trying to find a way to make this proposition work. So he's basically trying to sort stones for a place just based upon what he has to deal with from a tenant standpoint. So places like Birkdale are very difficult for him to reconcile with all of these different inputs that he has to deal with. I mean, because basically retail is a series of transactions that has its own rules of behavior to unfold over time. There's a land transaction, right? There's a transaction with zoning. Most places don't allow what we see, at Birkdale Village. The only reason Birkdale Village happened, frankly, is that the town in whose jurisdiction it resides, Huntersville, back in the 90s, along with the towns of Davidson and Cornelius, adopted the first form-based codes in America. Now, they were crude codes. They weren't the best codes, but they did it anyway. They adopted them. A major developer came in there on that site, didn't believe it was true, said he wanted to do a big strip center. Went to the planning department. They said, no, we have a law. Here's what it said. Well, they thought they could politically gerrymander it. And of course, what did they do? Go to the mayor and the city council. And to their surprise, they found out they had a council and a mayor that was also supportive. I happened to have a couple of clients who took the bet. They said, we'll do this. And Birkdale Village was the result. So it's very difficult, sometimes to have these things put off, but sometimes these rules and ordinances are your friend. But you have a whole series of people about a series of transactions. You have leasing agents that just want to get to the table and collect their money, and they will not fight against what they're being told by those tenants. There's a whole just series of transactions which ends up with the banking community. Now, there are a number out there, again, like Easton Town Center, just like Birkdale, that are very successful. Has mixed-use, retail, an office above this. People love them. Easton Town Center in Columbus, Ohio, has a trade area that consists of the entire state of Ohio. It's not a 15-mile trade area like you'll normally hear, or a 20-mile. The state of Ohio. But still, for every Birkdale and every Easton Village, or Easton Town Center, I will tell you, there's probably 10 to 15 other, quote, lifestyle centers that failed because they didn't attend to the fundamentals of the retail. And that's the other disconnect. The retail developers and the retailers are not wrong. There's only certain places these things can go. There's certain formats in which they have to be done. Okay? You can't ignore these very basic principles. And a lot of times, planners don't see this. A lot of times, planners who want to implement a form-based code, rightly so, will require something called a regulating plan. And I will tell you, you cannot layer a regulating plan, which is part of the Congress of the New Urbanism Orthodoxy, over these retail mixed-use type zones, because you don't allow the flexibility, the exchange between tenant, between developer, and between banker to take place. I could talk all night on that one. But even with conventional developers that want to sometimes do mixed use, they'll come back and say, Terry, it doesn't work. In the jargon of the development community, it doesn't pencil. It's too much brain damage. Go away. We've done the hard math. Anyone cares to see it, I'll send it to them, that refutes this argument, that in fact it doesn't cost more, that you can even without public subsidy pay for mixed use in these places. Birkdale Village was built without one dime of public assistance. Does that mean I'm advocating for the public not to have the stake in this? No, because I think these places can be better with targeted investment, primarily for parking structures. But it's not an absolute necessity. Here's what you normally get. You get developers who sense, this is really cynical, you get developers who sense this undercurrent of human desire for these kinds of places, but when they're faced with zoning that doesn't work for them and tenants that are really recalcitrant, they try to put off these inside-out kind of strip centers like this and say that's placemaking, and this is like a Birkdale Village framed around two pedestrian-friendly squares. I have looked at this diagram for hours trying to find those two friendly squares, and I cannot find it, much less classic New England styling. I've been working in New England now extensively for, I don't know, the last 7 years, and I can't reconcile those things. Here's the other big problem. It's the banking industry. More importantly, the banking regulatory world. Bankers live their lives. Bankers in the room, I apologize up front. But in terms of real estate lending, bankers live their world by looking through rearview mirrors. If you can't find a comp for something, if you can't find 5 other successful things like that in your market, then the whole idea doesn't exist. You can't underwrite it. It doesn't matter. If you can't find someone to do a market study that says there's overwhelming desire for what you're talking about, it doesn't exist. It's all about data. Big data, small data, sideways data, data. And that is a fundamental problem because it's not just at the banker, because the problem is banks are then subject to regulation. Look at the regulations that have come out of the last 5 years. If it was bad 7 years ago or 6 years ago, it's gotten worse. And of course, the thing is they say banks were unregulated, they made bad loans. The loans and stuff that were made were missing. They were based upon still looking in the rearview mirror at false data, which led them to support some of these lifestyle centers through false data, instead of looking at the real issues of how you create these places that have long-term value. It's like everyone's looking at the black squares on the checkerboard instead of looking at the red. You need to look at both squares when you play this real estate game. Now, think about it. The notion of risk. I mean, in the consumer products world, people do take risks. You know, you went from the normal phone, somebody said this idea of a cellular phone in a bag. Well, what a great idea. But it didn't take long for that to be killed with the flip phone. Now we have the iPhone, and the next up, maybe, we'll see if it works, but somebody's taking the risk, Samsung, to have a Dick Tracy phone on your wrist, right? In a market economy, we accept at the product level this level of risk. But when it comes to real estate, it's more like the time of Ceausescu than it is a time that the greatest democracy and capitalist system in the world should be following. Here's some of the quotes from NAHB, one of the big real estate organizations. The view is fairly rosy with a few caveats. Underwriting is still conservative, and the larger lenders are sticking to their preference for high-quality, stabilized assets in primary markets. What that means is, folks, at various levels, to translate about that conservative stuff, is that it means that if they can't find something that looks just like it, they're not going to underwrite it, and a high-quality, stabilized asset in a primary market means a gateway city. Now, in real gateway cities, they'll underwrite urbanism, these kinds of places. Chicago, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, gateway city, still on the water. These kinds of places, they will have no problem with this. But when it comes to places like Charlotte, like Little Rock, and many of the other places, don't even bring up the conversation many times. Because here's the real insanity. They'll have no problem coming into a sub-market, and what's happening right now with the apartments, and with underwriting criteria that says you can only build an apartment this way and this way, and you can't have retail underneath it. You'll get penalized. They will not underwrite the retail. But they'll let you come in the markets, and they will come and do one after another, the same product. But if you bring in things like Birkdale Village, you get penalized. It's not on the table. There are exceptions. I'm being a little bit melodramatic perhaps, but it is very difficult. The prudent developer, though, if he wants to make a fee, he wants to get his thing quickly built, get it rent stabilized, he hopes, before a crash comes, and so he can sell it to a pension fund, he's going to do one of these. He's not going to do the long-term value proposition. And you can find it inside, you know, the rules that regulate commercial real estate lending, coming from our own government, right? Look at some of this. They talk about risk. I talk about risk in one way. I'll talk about the risk. I'll tell you. You tell me what's more risky. To go into a market that can support, say, 3 garden multifamily projects, and you come in there and you're the guy building the 6th one, or do something like a Birkdale Village that's like the iPhone, that's answering questions people hadn't really thought of, and you cannibalize the rest of the market. That is exactly what happened in the sub-market where Birkdale Village is located. So it's a different calculation of risk. But if you go to the Comptroller's Manual, we talk about compliance risk. It's hard to read, I apologize. Compliance risk, bank CRE lending is governed by the statutes and regulations described in this booklet, which are very strict. You can imagine, right? Strategic risk. A sound CRE lending program requires management and staff who have the knowledge and experience to control the risk. That means, again, they have knowledge of what they can see out of that rearview mirror, and they control. And a reputation risk, because you don't follow 1 and 2, compliance and strategic, reputation risk. Failure may tarnish the bank's reputation. Well, who in the world? There's an old joke one time. No one in a corporation ever got fired for buying AT&T, right? Everybody's heard that old saw, right? It's true very much in the banking industry. So what's happening is we're engaging, before you know it, into the next sucker cycle. Apartments is a hot asset right now. Basically, garden multifamily apartments done in a way that doesn't answer and respond to any of those people you heard talking at Birkdale Village or any of the other data out there that's being tracked by people, particularly in the consumer products industry. All these apartments are being built. You heard it here first, folks. All these apartments are being built. Pension funds and other things are going to come in, swoop in and buy them. And then you're going to find out, oh, we're overbuilt. Assets are devalued. You know, woe was us. You know, got another real estate bubble because it's not meeting the needs of the people. But it passed all the tests. So what really needs to happen? Well, first off, again, I think you really need to be bold in your zoning laws. Not to the point that you become overly restrictive, but you need, as communities, as people who have the values and want these places, to say, no, we want to see this occur and we're not going to compromise. We will be flexible in terms of how you do it. We will even be your partner in doing it. I totally support mechanisms such as TIF financing for things that I consider public infrastructure, roads, utilities, and parking decks. Those are things I think that really help you get to where you want to go. And the irony is, I think, you know, if there is a way which one can talk to people in Washington to really get the policies that regulate banks more in line with what HUD is advocating. Look at this great grant you have. HUD is doing some fantastic things that are completely in alignment with the stuff that I'm talking about tonight, particularly the Birkdale Villages of the world. But how is it we have such a dysfunction deal? We talk about how we want people to invest in our environment, yet we have banking regulations and policies that are anathema to the very thing that we want to see. Because if you do those two things, the response to the developers will come along. There's a great even article. The CRE lending is increasing. In the Wall Street Journal today, I guess first page of the B section talked about it. It's starting to heat up even more. Things are starting to loosen in terms of money flow. My fear, yes, the money flow is loosening, but it's only going to those projects that fit their tired, outworn formulas and not the way that people want to live. Now, I don't want to end on a negative note. Even people like Joel Kotkin, who is considered by many people in the smart growth community as an enemy, has a very pragmatic attitude about this, if you read that. But fundamentally, we can make suburban communities more self-sufficient. This is where I think the development community has an enormous opportunity, which is, if you will, the urbanization of suburbia. So urban life becomes possible in Fargo, North Dakota. Even people like Joel Kotkin see both the social value and the economic value in what I'm talking about. And to end on a positive note, there are intrepid developers out there that are going against these winds. They see the opportunity under the operating principle of a scarcity model to come in and succeed when everybody else is being discouraged. On your left, you see this is a project that was originally planned by DPZ that I and others came in and took over and rezoned in Londonderry, New Hampshire, a place, it took 2 years to do it. We got a 9-0 vote. Developer right here, Michael Kettenbach. He is about as a conservative person as you will ever meet in his politics and attitudes, but he sees the value of this in community. On the right-hand side, this is a community in the Research Triangle area of Charlotte, of Raleigh. It's a huge project, 1,100 acres, 3.5 million feet of retail, 8,000 residential units, 12 million square feet of office and research. It's being developed by Tom Hendrickson, who is decidedly blue. He ran both the President Clinton's campaigns in North Carolina and Hillary's campaigns in North Carolina and Al Gore's campaign in North Carolina. And both of them see in their own political divisions the value of this. There shouldn't be an issue between conservative and liberals, between people who live in cities and people who live in the suburbs. It's really about all of us. It's about an urbanism for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Great job.
We've got time for some questions. If you would wait till we get the microphone to you. Mary, there's one in the back. Right.
Hi, my name is Mara, and I'm a second-year student here at the Clinton School. Thank you for coming tonight. In your talk, you spoke about mixed-use space for these types of developments, and I was wondering if there's any sort of focus on, for the residential components of those developments, any sort of focus on mixed-income housing, and why or why not?
Well, yes, absolutely. If we'd had time, I would have talked about it even more. I believe it's clearly part of these communities. In fact, we are doing one now in Charlotte. It was a former slum that was torn down. That was downwind of all the factories, right? That's where these things, a lot of times, the people who cannot afford to live somewhere else, it's where the trains were, their coal smoke, it's where the graveyards were, it's where all of the dumps were, right? Got all that. Of course, the 21st century, new reality. And in that case, it's about 800 units of housing, probably about 125,000 square feet of retail, and a third of those units are tax credit units, and the other units are market units. I think it's very much part of these mixes. I think that the problem always, though, the further you get out of town, the more resistance you get. It's amazing to me how creative, bright people can be in making arguments against tax credit workforce housing, much less low-income housing. It's some of the most creative language I've ever heard to obfuscate the core issue, which I personally think is primarily racially motivated. But it's very important, and it needs to be part of every plan you do.
Questions? Got a question?
Yes, you were talking about the CCRCs, and are you seeing any redevelopment, reinvention of some of the CCRCs that have the capability of changing that model that's coming along? Because I'm seeing some things with like Habersham in Florida and some of what Steve Nygren's doing outside of Atlanta, those types of things.
Yes, we're actually involved in one of the largest, at least is the largest by land, CCRC in Charlotte. It's called Aldersgate. It's under the aegis of the Methodist Church. They have 220 acres. And while they're improving their core CCRC offering, we have now planned a NORC for them that will occur basically, if you consider the CCRC the fort, and you consider everything else outside the fort, we're doing something outside the fort. And the idea is for these guys, they know that they will still have some people who will want the CCRC fixed price continuum of care, the security that comes with that. But at the same time, others won't, and the other time, they also need another income stream. So some people will buy all of their services bundled. Other people will buy it a la carte from the CCRC. But it is really something that over the next 10 to 15 years is going to radically change that industry. There will be winners and losers and a lot of other people in between.
Yes, we got a question right here.
Thank you. Your comment about Harley-Davidson brought up this question for me. I'm a public health scientist, and I know that noise pollution is one of the main, or is a major significant health risk to all of us. That reduces life expectancy, raises blood pressure, and so forth. I was wondering how you deal with that in your communities. I know Harley-Davidsons aren't the only one. It's noisy buses, cars with bad mufflers, but when you have people living in close environments, noise pollution can be a real serious problem. How do you deal with that?
That's a very good question. Other than trying to stay away from interstates as best we can, because as we both know, low frequency sound is the most pernicious of those. Obviously, building technologies have gotten better. I mean, I would contend that the only thing that started to make cities habitable in many ways was the advent of air conditioning, when you could actually close your window and not listen to the fight of your neighbors. I think, though, as we go forward with these things, to answer your question, to point, nothing, quite frankly, other than prudent measures to ward off against the obvious kind of continuous sound generators. But I do think we're going to be an electric world. I think that a lot of people, think the internal combustion engine will be here in its full glory. For another 100 years, but I think not. It's quickly going away. All you have to do is look at the CAFE standards that were approved by the automobile manufacturers. They didn't blink really when the Obama administration put forth the standards. You would have thought they would have put up a fight, which leads you to believe that the administration didn't ask enough. But they know that this change is coming, and that people will also be walking more, driving less. I mean, you look at the percentage of millennials that have automobile license. It's dropping. It's concerning the automobile companies. I saw a funny article in one of the magazines, one of the automotive magazines, where they actually went and got an urban kid who had never driven in his life. He was like 21 years old, and their job was to convert that urban kid to the joy of driving cars. And they let him drive Ferraris, they let him drive off-road vehicles, and all sorts of things. It's kind of a humorous, tongue-in-cheek article to see if they could convert him away from riding transit and walking and into the car world. And they were really not successful. But so it's a concern. So I think the place itself and the life that it generates, along with the improvements in technology, will combine to minimize that concern.
Here, let me ask you a question. If you, with all your work in urban planning, what cities would you recommend a community like Little Rock look at when it's looking at becoming more bicycle and walkable friendly? Where would be the models you would look?
Well, the obvious ones are there, and I don't think it's necessarily a scale, small places. I mean, you looked at Portland. You look what's happening in all the big cities. I think it's more, it's not one community. It's a look at the best policies in the smaller places and in the larger places that are happening. I would say what I understand about Little Rock, I think a lot of people should look at you. When I understand, I'm a cyclist. I rediscovered cycling back about 3 years ago, once I started to almost peg 200 pounds, and my cardiologist started looking at me over his glasses instead of through his glasses. I decided it was time to make a change. So I really applaud you and what you've done in terms of cycling. But I think that's why organizations such as the CNU, even the ULI now is getting to this. There's a new initiative for green cities and walkable cities that's coming out of ULI. Stay tuned for about within the next year. You'll see some amazing things come out of it, because that's the goodness about that is that's the organ that most of the mainstream larger developers look to. When you start to get the imprimatur of the Urban Land Institute, then you've kind of it's a sea change. You've crossed a good line.
Let's give Terry a round of applause. Thank you for being here.